All right, think about this. Every single day, we rely on this 3-pound invisible engine to process literally everything we experience. So today, in this explainer, we are going right under the hood of human consciousness. We're going to see what actually happens, biologically, when that engine misfires.
When the brain's systems become disrupted, everyday experiences can suddenly feel confusing, exhausting, or overwhelming. We so often forget that the brain is essentially just that, an engine. It's this incredibly complex biological machine. And just like any other physical organ in your body, it can experience disruptions that turn a totally ordinary Tuesday into an absolute battle. It's not a matter of a bad attitude, it is strictly a matter of biology.
So here is what we are going to cover in this explainer. First, the engine of experience. 2. Depression. 3. Generalized Anxiety Disorder. 4. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And finally, reconceptualizing mental health.
Let's start with Section 1, the engine of experience. Your brain controls every single thought, emotion, memory, and decision you make. I mean, even when you're just sitting there at rest, it's burning about 20% of your body's energy just to keep the engine idling and maintain your basic synaptic connections. When it's working fine, life feels manageable. But because every single thing you experience is processed by this engine, mental disorders are profoundly real medical conditions. They fundamentally change how a person thinks, feels, and connects with others. They are absolutely not signs of personal weakness, any more than a faulty spark plug is a moral failure of your car.
Moving right along to Section 2, depression.
Look, we all know what ordinary sadness feels like. It's usually a temporary emotional reaction with a very obvious trigger, like a breakup or a bad day at work. But clinical depression is an entirely different beast. It is a condition that physically alters the brain's chemical messengers, specifically neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. These are the literal biological circuits that create feelings of happiness and motivation. And because it's a profound chemical disruption, it can hit someone who has a seemingly perfect life on paper. You literally cannot just stay positive or go outside to fix a malfunctioning dopamine system.
Just imagine this. You sleep for 10 solid hours, but you wake up feeling completely hollowed out. You sit down to your favorite meal, and it tastes like hash. Socializing feels completely emotionally empty. Even the simplest choices, like picking a shirt out of your closet, suddenly demand this monumental, exhausting effort. It's a quiet thief that just steals your energy. And because pretending that everything is fine requires metabolic resources that simply aren't there anymore, people often end up unintentionally isolating themselves from the ones they love.
All right, let's look at Section 3, Generalized Anxiety Disorder.
Now, we all experience occasional worry over exams or money. That's a totally biologically appropriate response to stress. But generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, is like having a smoke detector that goes off just because you made toast. The brain gets locked in this constant, relentless state of alert. It's reacting like there's a predator in the room, even when you're just sitting safely on your couch. The body's ancient fight-or-flight stress response gets permanently switched on, flooding the system with cortisol. And this triggers a brutal snowball effect. Let's say something entirely mundane happens, a delayed text message from a friend. Instantly, the GAD brain creates a worst-case scenario without a single shred of evidence. That sparks this endless, exhausting loop of what-ifs. Should you call? Are they mad? What if they were in an accident? These thoughts repeat at lightning speed until it leads to severe emotional and physical exhaustion. The brain is literally treating an ordinary social interaction like a life-threatening crisis. Because the mind is endlessly jumping from concern to concern, the central nervous system never actually rests, and your body pays a massive toll for that. We're talking tight shoulders, an uncomfortable stomach, frequent headaches, and a racing heart for absolutely no reason. Telling someone with severe anxiety to just stop worrying is honestly like telling someone to just stop having a fever. It doesn't work.
Which brings us to Section 4, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD. The common myth out there paints ADHD as just a simple inability to focus. You know, a mix of laziness and carelessness. But neurologically, the reality is entirely different. ADHD is primarily an executive function issue. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for regulating attention, self-control, and motivation, simply develops and fires less efficiently, often because it's deficient in dopamine and norepinephrine. Again, this is a biological regulation issue, not a character flaw.
And this leads us to a neurological phenomenon that completely shatters the stereotype of the distracted mind, and that is hyperfocus. Someone with ADHD can become so intensely absorbed in an activity they genuinely enjoy that they literally lose track of time for hours. The reality is practically the opposite of an inability to focus. The true difficulty isn't a lack of attention, it's the brain's inability to steer the wheel and control exactly where that attention goes.
Because the ADHD brain is chronically starved for stimulation. Trying to generate motivation for routine, mundane tasks is genuinely agonizing. Cognitively, things like doing paperwork feel almost impossible to start, leading to drifting attention and unfinished projects. And physically, this translates to profound restlessness. Tapping fingers, shaking legs, pacing the room, they aren't trying to be disruptive. Their understimulated brain is just desperately trying to create its own physical momentum to stay alert.
Throw time blindness into the mix and it gets even harder. This is a daily struggle where a task that takes a full hour is genuinely perceived by the brain as only taking 15 minutes. This naturally leads to chronic lateness and living in a constant state of last-minute panic. So while a manager might casually label them as unmotivated, behind the scenes, that person is sprinting on an invisible treadmill just to keep up with internal hurdles that neurotypical brains simply do not have.
Let's wrap this up with Section 5, Reconceptualizing Mental Health. Ultimately, as this quote highlights, the gap between intention and action is one of the defining challenges of these disorders, and it cannot simply be overcome through willpower alone. Knowing exactly what needs to be done, but feeling completely paralyzed to start it, is a uniquely painful experience. Whether it's the emotional emptiness of depression, the false alarms of GAD, or the intention gap of ADHD, none of these biological realities can be cured just by trying harder.
So think about it. If we wouldn't tell a broken bone to stay positive to heal itself, why do we consistently demand that of a struggling brain? Recognizing the physical, biological reality of this invisible engine is really just the first step. The real question is, now that you know what's actually happening under the hood, how will you change the way you respond to the people struggling right next to you?